Welcome to Hearths of Myths. Today, the air grows still, and the golden heat of the sun begins to shimmer over the ancient dunes. We are walking the complete path of the eternal guardian, the Sphinx. The desert does not keep secrets. It simply waits for the wind to reveal what has always been there, buried beneath layers of time and forgotten whispers. Imagine, if you will, a silence so profound that it begins to have a sound of its own, a low, rhythmic hum that vibrates through the soles of your feet. This is the silence of the Giza plateau, a place where the air itself feels ancient, heavy with the weight of 5,000 years of human longing and divine mystery. Before the first stone was ever laid for the Great Pyramids, before the first king of the first dynasty ever wore the double crown of a unified Egypt, there was the sand. And within that sand there was a presence, a guardian waiting to be called forth from the bedrock of the world. To understand the Sphinx, we must first unlearn the modern world. We must strip away the noise of engines, the glare of electric lights, and the hurried pace of our lives. We must step back into a time when the sky was the only map and the river Nile was the only road. In this ancient reality, the world was divided into two distinct realms, the Black Land and the Red Land. The Black Land, or Kemet, was the fertile silt brought by the annual flood, the place of life, farming, and the domestic hearth. But surrounding this narrow ribbon of life was the Red Land, the Dishret, the vast, unforgiving desert that stretched toward the ends of the earth. The desert was a place of chaos, of wild storms, and of the unknown. It was the domain of Set, the god of confusion and raw power. Yet, it was also the place where the sun was born every morning, and where it died every evening. It is on this fragile boundary between the living green of the valley and the burning red of the desert that the Sphinx sits. It is the sentinel at the edge of existence. In the earliest days of Egyptian thought, long before the monument we see today was carved, the lion was the supreme symbol of this threshold. The ancient hunters of the Nile Valley watched the lions. They saw how they prowled the edges of the desert at twilight. They noticed how a lion could stare directly into the sun without blinking, its golden eyes reflecting the solar fire. To the Egyptians, the lion was a solar creature, a being that embodied the heat and ferocity of the sun's rays. It was the guardian of the gates. In the profound depths of Egyptian cosmology, the concept of the horizon, or the Akhet, held a spiritual significance that is difficult for us to grasp today. The Akhet was represented in hieroglyphs as two mountains with the sun disk rising between them. But it was not just a place where the earth met the sky. The Akhet was a transition point, a thin veil where the physical world dissolved into the spiritual realm. It was the place of the glorious light. To enter the Akhet was to undergo a transformation. When the sun god Ra passed through the horizon at dawn, he was transformed from the aged, tired deity of the night into the vibrant, newborn falcon of the morning. The guardian of this sacred transition was the god Aker. In the most ancient texts, such as the pyramid texts found in the inner chambers of the kings, Aker is described as a pair of lions sitting back to back. These two lions were named Sef and Duat, yesterday and tomorrow. They looked in opposite directions, guarding the entrance and the exit of the underworld. They were the keepers of the passage through which the sun's bark had to sail every night. Imagine the weight of that responsibility. These lions stood at the very hinge of time. They ensured that the sun would always return, that the cycle of light would never be broken by the forces of darkness. The Great Sphinx of Giza is the physical manifestation of this cosmic idea. It is the Akhet carved into the earth itself. When you look at its massive form, you are not just looking at a statue. You are looking at a mountain that has been given a face and a soul. The choice of the lion's body was a deliberate theological statement. The lion represents the power of the earth, the raw, muscular force of nature that can either protect or destroy. By giving this lion a human head, specifically the head of the pharaoh, the ancients were illustrating the perfect union of divine power and human intelligence. It was the Shesep Ankh, the living image. This was not a representation of a king. It was a vessel for a cosmic force that ensured the stability of the entire universe. The limestone from which the Sphinx was carved has its own story to tell. It is a story that begins millions of years ago, when the plateau was the floor of a shallow sea. The stone is filled with the fossils of ancient sea creatures, tiny shells that once drifted in tropical waters. When the craftsmen of the Old Kingdom began their work, they were essentially carving a creature out of the memory of the ocean. They did not build the Sphinx block by block. They found it. They excavated a deep trench around a massive outcropping of rock, slowly revealing the lion that had been sleeping in the stone for eons. The scale of the excavation is staggering. Thousands of tons of limestone had to be removed using only copper chisels and wooden mallets. You can almost hear the rhythmic clinking of the metal, the shouts of the foremen, and the heavy breathing of men working in the shadow of the pyramids. As the morning sun begins to rise, the first rays do not hit the pyramids first. They hit the face of the Sphinx. This is by design. The Sphinx is oriented with such precision that it stares directly at the point of the vernal equinox. It is the first to greet the return of the light. In this moment, the cold stone begins to warm, and the shadows in its deep-set eyes shift, giving the impression of a slow, deliberate movement. The Sphinx becomes Horemakhet, Horus in the horizon. Horus was the god of kingship, the rightful heir to the throne of the earth. By identifying the Sphinx with Horus, the Egyptians were proclaiming that the pharaoh was the living guardian of the solar cycle. He was the one who stood between his people and the encroaching chaos of the night. Think of the sensory experience of standing before the Sphinx in the year 2500 BC. The monument would not have been the weathered, sandy gray figure we see today. It would have been a riot of color. The face was painted a vibrant, deep red, the color of the sun and the life force. The Nemes headdress, with its regal folds, was likely painted in stripes of blue and gold, shimmering in the heat. A false beard, the symbol of divine authority, would have hung from its chin. Between its paws stood an altar, where priests offered incense and meat to the solar deity. The air would have been thick with the sweet, heavy scent of burning kaifi, a sacred incense made of honey, wine, raisins, and myrrh. The smoke would rise in blue curls against the backdrop of the massive, limestone-encased pyramids, which in those days reflected the sun like giant mirrors of white-polished stone. The Sphinx was never meant to be a lonely figure. It was the centerpiece of a vast religious complex. To its front was the Sphinx Temple, a massive structure built of giant limestone blocks, some weighing over 100 tons. Within this temple, The rituals were synchronized with the movement of the sun. The temple had 24 pillars, representing the 24 hours of the day and night. Everything about the site was a celebration of the sun's eternal journey. The Sphinx was the conductor of this solar symphony. It watched the sun rise in the east, and it watched the sun set in the west, ensuring that the transition between the two was smooth and harmonious. But there is a darker side to the Sphinx's guardianship. In the Book of the Dead, that collection of spells designed to guide the soul through the perils of the afterlife, the lion gods are the ones who execute the enemies of Ra. They are the terrifying ones who sit at the gates of the Duat, the underworld. To the righteous soul, the Sphinx is a protector, a guide who provides safe passage. But to the chaotic and the unrefined, it is a predator. It embodies the concept of Mat, the divine order. Mat is not just a passive law. It is a force that must be actively defended. The Sphinx is the muscle of Mat. Its paws are ready to strike down anyone who threatens the balance of the world. As the wind whistles through the fissures in the rock, you might imagine the Sphinx listening. In the New Kingdom, over 1,000 years after it was first carved, the Sphinx became a figure of popular devotion. It was no longer just a royal monument. It was Heishuel, the beloved father. People from all walks of life would come to the plateau to whisper their prayers into the ears of the stone giant. They believed the Sphinx could hear them, that it was a living intermediary between the mortal world and the divine sun. They left small stelae, or stone tablets, between its paws, recording their dreams and their gratitude. This transition from a distant royal symbol to a personal protective deity is one of the most fascinating chapters in the biography of the Sphinx. We must also consider the geological reality of the monument. The limestone of the Giza plateau is not uniform. It consists of different layers of varying hardness. The head of the Sphinx is carved from a much harder layer of limestone than the body, which is why the face has survived with such incredible detail, while the body has suffered from the erosion of wind and ancient rains. This variation in the stone creates a sense of life. The body seems to be melting back into the desert, while the head remains sharp and eternal, staring out at a world that changes while the Sphinx remains still. In the pyramid texts, the pharaoh is often said to become a lion. He is the one who eats the gods and devours their spirits. This is the raw, primal energy that the Sphinx channels. It is the energy of the first time, the Zep Tepi, the moment when the world was first created out of the watery void of Nun. The Sphinx is the bridge to that first time. It is the anchor that keeps the world from drifting back into the chaos of the primeval ocean. Every morning, when the sun touches its forehead, the world is created anew. The Zep Tepi is reenacted. The order of the universe is reaffirmed. Let us linger for a moment on the silence of the Sphinx. It is a silence that is not empty, but full of meaning. In the later Greek tradition, the Sphinx became a creature of riddles, a being that asked questions and destroyed those who could not answer. But in the original Egyptian context, the Sphinx does not ask questions. It is the answer. Its very existence is the answer to the problem of chaos. Its stillness is the answer to the turbulence of life. It teaches us that the highest form of power is not found in movement, but in the ability to remain unmoved. The Great Sphinx is the witness of ages. It has seen the Nile change its course, moving further and further away from the plateau. It has seen the golden limestone casings of the pyramids stripped away to build the mosques and palaces of Cairo. It has been buried up to its neck in sand for centuries, only to be dug out again and again by those who felt the pull of its mystery. There is a story told by the Arabs of the Middle Ages that the Sphinx was once a living talisman that kept the sand from swallowing the cultivated fields of Egypt. They called it Abul Hol, the father of terror. But it was a terror born of deep respect. Imagine the nights on the plateau when the moon is high and the limestone glows with an ethereal, milky light. In these hours, the Sphinx seems to lose its connection to the earth and become a creature of the stars. The Egyptians saw the constellations as a celestial reflection of their own land. The sky was a great river in which the gods sailed. Some researchers have suggested that the Sphinx was designed to mirror the constellation of Leo, creating a cosmic alignment between the earth and the heavens. Whether this was the intention of the original builders or not, the feeling of cosmic connection is undeniable when you stand in the shadow of the monument at midnight. The relationship between the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid is one of deep theological synergy. The pyramid is the Mur, the place of ascent. It is the ladder to the stars. The Sphinx is the Shesep, the image of the horizon. One represents the vertical journey of the soul to the heavens. The other represents the horizontal journey of the sun across the earth. Together, they form a complete map of the Egyptian spiritual universe. They are the two axes of the soul's geography. As we conclude this first expansive look at the origins and the cosmic setting of the Sphinx, feel the ancient heat of the sun on your back. Hear the distant murmur of the Nile. The Sphinx is more than a monument. It is a meditation on time and eternity. It is the lion that does not sleep and the king who does not die. It is the Akhet, the threshold where we begin our journey into the deep mysteries of the sand. We have only just begun to brush away the dust. Beneath the paws of the guardian, there are paths that lead into the heart of the earth and into the farthest reaches of the human spirit. In the next part of our exploration, we will move from the cosmic and the primeval to the era of the great builders. We will look closer at the specific pharaohs who claimed the Sphinx as their own, the political and spiritual motivations that led to its creation, and the incredible engineering feats required to carve a god out of the bedrock. We will see how the Sphinx became a tool of royal legitimacy, and how its face became a mirror for the aspirations of a civilization that aimed for nothing less than immortality. But for now, stay in this moment of dawn. Watch the light catch the red paint of the face and the blue of the headdress. Feel the presence of Aker, the twin lions of yesterday and tomorrow, supporting the sun as it breaks over the horizon. The Sphinx is waiting. It has all the time in the world. It is the guardian of the Akhet, the watcher of the light, and the eternal soul of the Egyptian desert. The journey into the horizon has truly begun, and the silence of the stone is the most eloquent guide we could ever hope to find. This is the first light, the first movement, the foundation of all that is to come in the long, storied life of the Great Sphinx. The sun has reached its zenith, and the shadows that once stretched long and thin across the Giza plateau have retreated, clinging to the bases of the limestone giants. We stand now in a world of blinding light and scorching heat, where the very air seems to vibrate with the intensity of the Egyptian day. In the previous movement of our journey, we looked at the Sphinx as a cosmic idea, the guardian of the horizon, the lion of the stars. But now, we must ground ourselves in the grit and the sweat of the old kingdom. We must look at the Sphinx not as a spirit, but as a masterpiece of engineering, a political statement, and a physical anchor for a dynasty that sought to conquer time itself. To truly understand the physical birth of the Sphinx, we must travel back to the Fourth Dynasty, a period of unparalleled ambition and architectural genius. This was the age of the Great Pyramid builders, men who looked at the barren plateau and saw not a wasteland, but a canvas for eternity. The air would have been filled with a different kind of noise than the desert silence we know today. Thousands of laborers, craftsmen, and priests moved with a focused, rhythmic energy. You would hear the constant, metallic ring of copper chisels striking limestone, the heavy thud of stone hammers, and the chanting of workers as they hauled massive blocks of rock on wooden sledges. The plateau was a living organism, a hive of activity dedicated to the transformation of the mortal into the immortal. In the center of this sacred landscape sits the Sphinx, a monument that is unique not just for its form, but for its construction. Unlike the pyramids, which were built block by block with stone, brought from quarries both near and far, the Sphinx was a work of subtraction. It was carved from the very bedrock of the plateau. Imagine a massive horseshoe-shaped quarry being dug into the limestone. As the workers removed millions of cubic feet of stone to clear a path for the king's causeway, they left behind a central core of rock, a natural outcropping that others might have seen as a nuisance or an obstacle. But the architects of the Fourth Dynasty saw something else. They saw a god waiting to be released. This limestone core is divided into 3 distinct geological layers, and understanding these layers is key to understanding why the Sphinx looks the way it does today. The lowest layer, member 1, is a hard, brittle limestone that forms the base and the paws. Above it lies member 2, a series of alternating soft and hard layers that make up the main body. It is this layer that has suffered the most from the ravages of time. The softer sections have eroded away, leaving the characteristic undulating ridges that give the body its weathered, ancient appearance. Finally, at the very top, we find member 3. This is a much harder, higher quality limestone. It is from this durable layer that the head of the Sphinx was carved. Think of the skill required to carve such a massive face from the living rock, 60 feet above the quarry floor. The sculptors had no room for error. Every stroke of the copper chisel had to be perfect. They were not just carving a face, they were carving the likeness of a king who was also a god. The identity of this king has been the subject of debate for centuries. Traditional archaeology points to Khafra, the builder of the second pyramid. His valley temple sits just to the south of the Sphinx, and a massive causeway connects the two. Some scholars look at the features of the Sphinx, the broad face, the set of the jaw, and see the likeness of Khafra's statues found in the nearby temple. They argue that the Sphinx was designed as a guardian for Khafra's funerary complex, a colossal extension of the king's own divine power. But others look closer and see a different story. They see the influence of Khafra's father, Khufu, the builder of the Great Pyramid. They suggest that Khufu, the most powerful of the Fourth Dynasty kings, may have been the one to initiate the carving of the Sphinx, perhaps envisioning it as a manifestation of the sun god Ra himself. In this interpretation, The Sphinx is not just a guardian of a single king's tomb, but a monument to the solar theology that began to dominate the Egyptian state during Khufu's reign. The face, then, would be the face of the Sun King, staring toward the east, forever watching for his own rebirth at dawn. There are even those who point to Jedefre, the eldest son of Khufu, who reigned briefly between his father and his brother Khafra. It was Jedefre who first added the title Son of Ra to the royal titulary, and some believe it was he who commissioned the Sphinx as a tribute to his deceased father, placing the face of Khufu upon the body of the solar lion. As we stand in the shadow of the Sphinx, these historical debates seem to blend into the stone. Regardless of which king's face is represented, the message remains the same. The pharaoh is the bridge between the earth and the sky. He wears the Namaz headdress, the pleated cloth of royalty that drapes over his shoulders like the mane of a lion. On his forehead sits the uraeus, the rearing cobra goddess Wadjet, ready to spit fire at the king's enemies. In ancient times, a long, plaited divine beard would have descended from his chin, further cementing his status as a being of the celestial realm. This beard was not found attached to the monument in modern times, but fragments of it were discovered buried in the sand between the paws, pieces of a broken divinity that once commanded the respect of an entire nation. The sheer scale of the Sphinx is difficult to comprehend without being in its presence. It is 73 meters long and 20 meters high. To walk from the tip of its tail to the front of its paws is to walk the length of a modern city block. Yet, for all its size, it is a monument of incredible precision. The Sphinx temple, which sits directly in front of the paws, is perfectly aligned with the monument. During the equinoxes, an observer standing in the temple would see the sun set exactly on the shoulder of the Sphinx, disappearing behind the silhouette of the pyramids. This was not a chance occurrence. The entire Giza plateau was a massive stone clock, a cosmic machine designed to track the movements of the sun and the stars, ensuring that the king's spirit remained in sync with the eternal rhythms of the universe. The construction of the Sphinx temple itself is a marvel of the 4th dynasty. The temple was built using the massive limestone blocks excavated from the Sphinx's enclosure. Some of these blocks weigh more than 100 tons. Imagine the logistical nightmare of moving such stones without the aid of modern cranes or iron tools. The Egyptians used wooden rollers, mud-slicked ramps, and the sheer power of hundreds of men pulling in unison. They fitted the blocks together with such accuracy that even today, after thousands of years of erosion, you cannot slide a thin blade between many of the joints. This temple was a place of solar worship, where priests performed rituals to the 3 aspects of the sun: Khepri in the morning, Ra at noon, and Atum in the evening. The Sphinx, as the living image of the sun god, was the silent participant in every ceremony. But the Sphinx was not just a religious site, it was a psychological one. To the ancient Egyptian, the sight of the Sphinx would have been a profound reminder of the stability of the state. In a world where the desert was always encroaching, where the Nile's flood was unpredictable, and where chaos was a constant threat, the Sphinx stood as an immovable bulwark. It was the Mat made manifest in stone. Mat was the concept of truth, balance, and cosmic order. The king's primary duty was to maintain Mat, and the Sphinx was the ultimate symbol of that duty. As long as the Sphinx stood watch, the people believed the world was safe. The sun would rise, the river would flow, and the gods would be satisfied. We must also think about the living image, or Shesep Ankh, as a political tool. The pharaohs of the Fourth Dynasty were absolute rulers, but their power rested on their perceived relationship with the divine. By carving their likeness into the bedrock of the plateau, they were claiming a literal, physical connection to the land of Egypt. The Sphinx was the signature of the king written into the earth. It was a statement of ownership that transcended generations. Even when the Fourth Dynasty faded and a new line of kings took the throne, the Sphinx remained, a permanent reminder of the glory and the power of the pyramid builders. As we linger in the quarry, looking up at the weathered flanks of the lion, we can see the marks of ancient repairs. The Sphinx has been a monument in need of care for almost as long as it has existed. Even in the Old Kingdom, the soft limestone of Member 2 began to flake and erode. Later kings, such as those of the 18th dynasty and the Saite period, added layers of protective masonry, smaller blocks of limestone designed to sheath the crumbling body and preserve the form of the lion. These repairs are like the rings of a tree, marking the different eras of Egyptian history and the enduring respect that even later generations had for this ancient guardian. There is a strange intimacy in the face of the Sphinx, despite its colossal size. If you look closely at the eyes, you can see that they are not perfectly horizontal. They tilt slightly upward, staring toward a point on the horizon that only the god can see. The mouth is set in a calm, enigmatic expression. Not quite a smile, but a look of profound serenity. It is the face of someone who has seen everything, and yet remains untroubled. This is the Sphinx-like quality that has fascinated travelers for millennia. It is a face that invites projection. We see in it our own questions, our own fears, and our own longing for permanence. The environment around the Sphinx would have been very different 4,500 years ago. There is evidence that the Giza plateau was not the barren desert we see today. During the Old Kingdom, the climate was wetter, and the plateau may have been a savanna-like environment, with grasses and perhaps even some trees. The Nile flowed much closer to the monument, its waters perhaps even reaching the edge of the Sphinx's enclosure during the height of the inundation. Imagine the Sphinx reflected in the shimmering waters of the Nile, a golden lion rising out of the blue river. It would have been a sight of breathtaking beauty, a literal union of the Red Land and the Black Land. As we walk around the monument, we come to the dream Stela of Thutmose IV, which sits between the giant paws. While we will cover the story of this stela in more detail later, its presence here is a reminder that the Sphinx was often buried by the very desert it was meant to guard. The wind-blown sand of the Sahara is a relentless force. Within a few centuries of its construction, the Sphinx enclosure would have begun to fill with sand. By the time of the New Kingdom, over 1,000 years after Khafra, only the head of the Sphinx would have been visible, a strange, stony fruit growing out of the dunes. This cycle of burial and rediscovery is a central theme in the biography of the Sphinx. It is a monument that refuses to stay hidden, a god that demands to be seen. The engineering feat of the Sphinx extends beneath the surface as well. For decades, legends have persisted about secret chambers and tunnels hidden under the paws and the body of the lion. While modern geological surveys and ground-penetrating radar have identified several anomalies and small cavities, the Hall of Records spoken of by mystics and ancient legends remains elusive. But the existence of these theories speaks to the power of the Sphinx to ignite the human imagination. We cannot accept that it is just a statue. We feel that it must be a container, a vessel for some lost wisdom or hidden truth. In a way, The Sphinx is a hall of records, its very stones recording the geological history of the Earth and the cultural history of the people who shaped it. Think of the tools used by the workers. Copper was the primary metal of the Old Kingdom. It is a soft metal, and against the limestone of Giza, it would have dulled quickly. This means that for every hour of carving, dozens of hours were spent sharpening and smelting tools. The logistics of the construction site were as impressive as the monument itself. There were bakeries to feed the thousands of workers, breweries to provide them with beer, and a complex system of administration to oversee every detail. The Sphinx was the product of a total societal effort. It was a project that unified the nation under a single divine goal. The Sphinx is also a masterclass in the use of light and shadow. The architects of the Fourth Dynasty understood that the sun was their primary collaborator. They carved the monument so that as the sun moves across the sky, the features of the Sphinx change. In the harsh light of midday, it looks powerful and imposing, its muscular flanks standing out in sharp relief. In the soft light of evening, it looks more contemplative, its face softened by the golden glow of the setting sun. The Sphinx is a dynamic monument, a being that breathes with the light of the day. As we conclude this second section, let the scale of the achievement sink in. The Great Sphinx is not just a relic of a dead civilization. It is a testament to what is possible when human genius is fueled by divine fire. It is a mountain that was taught to think. It is a lion that was taught to protect. It is the face of a king who refused to be forgotten. We leave the construction site now, the sound of the chisels fading into the distance, replaced by the howling of the desert wind. The Sphinx remains in its enclosure, its eyes fixed on the eastern horizon, waiting for the next dawn. In the next part of our journey, we will skip forward a millennium to a time when the Sphinx was an ancient, half-forgotten relic, buried in the sand. We will meet a young prince who fell asleep in its shadow and received a message that would change the course of his life and the history of Egypt. We will see how the Sphinx was reclaimed and restored, transitioning from a royal guardian of the Old Kingdom to a personal god of dreams and prophecies. The story of the Sphinx is a story of layers, and we have only just begun to peel back the first few centuries of its eternal life. Stay with the silence, stay with the stone, and listen to the whispers of the wind as it tells the tale of the dreamer and the Sphinx. Time is a relentless ocean, and like the ocean, it has its tides. It flows over the works of man, sometimes lifting them to the heights of glory, and other times burying them beneath the weight of forgetting. By the time we reach the era of the New Kingdom, more than 1,000 years had passed since the hammers and chisels of Khafre's workers fell silent. The Old Kingdom, that titan of history, had faded into a legend, a distant memory of a golden age that felt more mythic than real. The Great Pyramids, once shimmering in white limestone, had begun to lose their luster, and the Nile had shifted its course, pulling its life-giving waters further and further away from the sacred plateau of Giza. But the most dramatic change was not in the water or the stone, but in the sand. The Sahara is a living, breathing entity, a sea of gold that moves with the whims of the wind. Without the constant care of the temple priests, without the daily sweeping of the courts, the desert began to reclaim its own. The great hollow from which the Sphinx was carved became a natural trap for the wind-blown dunes. Year after year, the sand piled higher and higher, creeping up the muscular flanks of the lion, swallowing its tail, its back, and finally its chest. By the mid-18th dynasty, the Great Sphinx was no longer a colossal monument of power. It was a ghost. Only the head and the curve of the shoulders remained above the surface, a strange, silent face staring out from a vast, empty wilderness of sand. To the people of that time, it was no longer known as the guardian of Khafra. It was simply Horemakhet, Horus in the horizon, a mysterious, ancient god that seemed as old as the sun itself. Imagine a young prince named Thutmose. He was a son of the warrior king Amenhotep II, but he was not the eldest son, and the path to the throne was neither clear nor guaranteed. In those days, the Giza plateau was not the tourist destination we know today. It was a royal hunting ground, a wild place filled with gazelles, lions, and desert foxes. One day, at the height of the midday sun, when the heat reflects off the limestone with a blinding intensity that makes the air shimmer like water, the young Thutmose found himself exhausted from the hunt. He sought refuge from the scorching rays, looking for the only shade in miles. He found it beneath the chin of the Great Sphinx, in the narrow space that remained between the stone face and the encroaching dunes. As he lay there, the silence of the desert began to press against him. It is a specific kind of silence, one that is punctuated only by the distant whistle of the wind and the rhythmic thrum of one's own heartbeat. Thutmose drifted into a deep sleep, a sleep that was not merely a rest for the body, but a portal for the soul. In the theology of the New Kingdom, dreams were the language of the gods, a bridge across which the divine could speak directly to the mortal. And as the prince slept in the shadow of the Father of Terror, the god himself stirred within the stone. The voice that spoke to him was not a sound heard with the ears, but a vibration felt in the marrow of his bones. It was the voice of Horemakhet Khepri Ra Atum, the multifaceted sun god who encompasses the beginning, the middle, and the end of all things. The god spoke with the intimacy of a father to a son. He looked upon the prince and said, "Behold me, look at me, my son Thutmose. I am thy father, Horemakhet Khepri Ra Atum. I give to thee my kingdom upon earth, at the head of the living. Thou shalt wear the white crown and the red crown upon the throne of Geb the heir. The land shall be thine in its length and in its breadth, that which the eye of the All-Lord illuminates. But every divine gift carries a price, a sacred duty. The god did not just offer power, he offered a plea. The sand of the desert is upon me, the god groaned, the sound like the shifting of tectonic plates. The sand of the territory on which I exist has reached me. I have waited for thee to do that which is in my heart, for I know that thou art my son and my protector. The Great Sphinx, the titan that had stood for 1,000 years, was suffocating. It was a prisoner of the desert, and it had chosen this young, unlikely prince to be its liberator. When Thutmose awoke, the sun was beginning to dip toward the west, casting long, violet shadows across the dunes. The air was cooling, but the prince's blood was on fire. He did not return to the palace as the same man who had left it. He carried within him a secret, a divine mandate that superseded the politics of the court. He understood that his destiny was tied to the stone. He gathered his followers, and more importantly, he gathered the resources of the state. He initiated the first great restoration project in human history. Close your eyes and imagine the scene. Hundreds of men, perhaps thousands, descended upon the Giza plateau. This was not a project of creation, but one of archaeology and devotion. They began the gargantuan task of clearing the sand. Basket by basket, they hauled away the desert. The work was slow and grueling. The wind would often fight them, blowing back in a single night what had taken a week to remove. But Thutmose was relentless. As the sand receded, the true majesty of the Sphinx began to emerge once more. The massive paws, the broad chest, the long, powerful tail curled around the haunch, all of it was revealed to the light of the sun for the first time in centuries. To commemorate this event, and to serve as a permanent record of his divine right to rule, Thutmose had a massive slab of pink granite quarried from Aswan, far to the south. This slab, weighing several tons, was carved with an intricate relief and a long, poetic inscription. It was placed directly between the paws of the Sphinx, leaning against its chest, where it still stands today. This is the dream Stela. At the top of the Stela, you can see two images of Thutmose himself, standing in a mirror image, offering incense and libations to the Sphinx. The Sphinx is depicted as a reclining lion with a human head, sitting atop a high pedestal that represents the gates of the temple. The text of the Stela is a masterpiece of royal propaganda and genuine religious fervor. It tells the story of the hunt, the nap, and the dream in vivid detail, but its true purpose was to settle any questions about Thutmose's legitimacy. In the complex world of the 18th dynasty, where various factions and siblings might vie for the throne, having the personal endorsement of Horemakhet was an unassailable shield. It was a message to the people and the priests. I am king, not just by birth, but by the direct command of the ancient guardian of the horizon. This restoration changed the character of the Giza plateau. It was no longer just a cemetery for the kings of the past. It became a vibrant center of new kingdom worship. Thutmose built a small open-air temple around the Stela, and his successors, including the great Ramses II, continued to honor the site. The Sphinx became a popular deity, a hearer of prayers. The common people, who were often excluded from the high temples of Amun at Thebes, felt a special connection to this god of the desert. They believed that Horemakhet was a personal protector who could grant health, prosperity, and long life. They left small clay lions and stone tablets as votive offerings, creating a sacred landscape that was bustling with life and hope. There is a profound beauty in this relationship between the prince and the monument. It represents a cycle of mutual salvation. Thutmose saved the Sphinx from the sand, and in return the Sphinx saved Thutmose from obscurity. It is a reminder that even the most powerful symbols need the care of the living to survive. Without the intervention of the dreamer, the Sphinx might have remained a hidden mountain of stone, eventually forgotten by the world. Instead, it was reborn as a symbol of the 18th dynasty's connection to the glorious past. The dream, Stela, also provides us with a glimpse into how the Egyptians of the New Kingdom viewed their own history. They did not see the Fourth Dynasty as a distant, alien era. They saw it as the foundation of their identity. By restoring the Sphinx, Thutmose was claiming his inheritance. He was weaving himself into the narrative of the great kings like Khafra and Khufu. He was saying that while the world changes, the spirit of Egypt is eternal, as steady as the gaze of the lion. But we must also consider the atmosphere of the dream itself. In the quiet hours of the night, when the desert wind is soft and the stars of the Milky Way look like a river of silver fire, the Giza plateau feels like a place where the rules of the world are suspended. The ancients believed that the Sphinx was the watchman of the place of the beginning of time. By sleeping between its paws, Thutmose was placing himself at the center of the universe. He was inviting the ancient magic of the Zep Tepi to inhabit his own life. The dream was a moment of transcendence, where the temporal power of a prince met the eternal power of a god. As the centuries continued to roll by, the sand would return again and again. The Sahara is patient. It knows that the works of man are temporary, but the desert is forever. After the death of Thutmose and the eventual decline of the new kingdom, the Sphinx was once again neglected. The temples were abandoned, the priests were gone, and the basket-bearers no longer cleared the enclosure. The dunes began their slow, silent crawl back toward the face of the god. By the time the Greeks and the Romans arrived in Egypt, the Sphinx was once again a head without a body, a mystery staring out from a golden sea. Yet, the legend of the dream lived on. The story of Thutmose and the Sphinx became a part of the folklore of the Nile. It was told by the campfires of the nomads and in the marketplaces of Memphis. It became a universal story of the relationship between the human spirit and the divine. We all have our sand, the mundane worries, the passage of time, the forgetting that threatens to bury our truest selves. And we all hope for a moment of clarity, a dream that tells us we are destined for something greater, provided we are willing to do the work of liberation. The dream, Stela, remains one of the most poignant monuments in the world. When you stand before it today, even with the scars of 3,000 years of weather and war, the figures of Thutmose and the Sphinx still speak of a moment of profound connection. The granite is cool to the touch, a stark contrast to the heat of the surrounding sand. The hieroglyphs are deep and clear, a voice from the past that refuses to be silenced. It is a testament to the power of a single vision to preserve a mountain of stone. Think of the prince's return to the Sphinx after his coronation. Imagine him standing there, no longer a dusty hunter, but a king in all his splendor, wearing the double crown and holding the crook and flail. He would have looked up at the face of the god, no longer a stranger, but a father and a confidant. The sand was gone, the enclosure was clean, and the Sphinx was once again the lord of the horizon. In that moment, the prince and the god were one. The order of the world was restored. As we conclude this chapter of the Sphinx's long life, let the image of the dreamer stay with you. We are all hunters in the desert of our own lives, seeking shade and seeking meaning. And sometimes, if we are quiet enough, and if we listen to the silence of the stone, we might hear a voice calling us to wake up, to clear the sand, and to claim the kingdom that has been waiting for us all along. The Sphinx is the guardian of that dream. It is the witness to our aspirations and the keeper of our promises. In the next part of our journey, we will explore the diverse forms that the Sphinx took throughout the Nile Valley. We will see that the Great Sphinx of Giza was not a solitary phenomenon, but the pinnacle of a tradition that included ram-headed guardians and hawk-headed warriors. We will travel to the great temples of Karnak and Luxor, walking down the Avenue of the Sphinxes, and we will discover how this symbol of power evolved and adapted to the changing needs of the Egyptian soul. The path is wide, the sand is shifting, but the gaze of the Sphinx is steady. Let us follow that gaze deeper into the heart of the myth. As we leave the singular shadow of the Great Sphinx of Giza, we must understand that the spirit of the lion guardian was not confined to a single limestone mound. It was a fluid, adaptive force that followed the Nile south into the heart of the great city of Thebes and deep into the sanctuary of the temples. In the Egyptian mind, a god was never just one thing. A deity was a multifaceted diamond, reflecting different lights depending on the angle of the sun or the needs of the soul. This is why the Sphinx, the Shesep Ankh or living image, began to change its face. It shed its human features to take on the countenances of the other great powers of the natural and divine worlds. To walk the path of the Sphinx is to walk through a gallery of transformations, where the body of the lion remains the constant anchor, but the head reveals the specific nature of the protection being offered. Close your eyes and imagine leaving the open desert of the north and entering the lush, palm-fringed avenues of the south. The air here is heavier, scented with the water of the Nile and the thick floral incense of the state temples. Before you lies the Dromos, the sacred way that connects the temple of Karnak to the temple of Luxor. This is not a mere road. It is a ritual artery, a 3-kilometer path lined on both sides by a silent army of stone. But these are not the human-face sphinxes of Giza. These are the Criosphinxes, the ram-headed guardians. The Criosphinx is a masterpiece of symbolic synthesis. The body is that of a powerful, reclining lion, but the head is that of a majestic ram with heavy, curling horns. To the ancient Egyptian, this was the ultimate expression of Amun-Ra, the king of the gods, the hidden one, who breathed life into the universe. The lion represents the solar heat, the raw power of Ra, while the ram represents the creative, procreative force of Amun. When you walk between these rows of stone, you are walking through the breath of the god. The ram was a symbol of fertility, of the Ka, or life force, that animated every living thing. By placing the ram's head on the lion's body, the architects were creating a guardian that was not just a warrior, but a creator. Imagine the Opet Festival, the great annual celebration where the statues of the gods were carried in golden barks from Karnak to Luxor. Thousands of people would line this avenue, their voices rising in a deafening chorus of praise, the air thick with the smoke of offerings. As the golden bark passed between the Criosphinxes, the stone guardians seemed to vibrate with the energy of the crowd. Each sphinx held a small statue of the pharaoh between its paws, tucked safely under its chin. This was a profound visual metaphor. The king is the child of the god, protected by the immense power and creative fertility of Amun-Ra. The sphinx was the shield. The king was the heart. The ram-headed sphinxes of Karnak are not weathered and lonely like their brother in Giza. They are orderly, disciplined, and numerous. They represent the power of the state and the organized religion of the new kingdom. They teach us that protection is not just about a single wall or a single guardian, but about a continuous line of vigilance. To walk the Dromos was to be under the constant gaze of the divine, a spiritual journey where every step was shadowed by the majesty of the Creator. But if the Criosphinx represents the creative breath of Amun, there is another, more terrifying form that dwells in the darker corners of the mythic landscape, the Hieracossphinx. This is the hawk-headed sphinx, a creature of searing intensity and celestial vigilance. The hawk, or falcon, was the animal of Horus, the god of the sky whose eyes were the sun and the moon. When the falcon's head is joined to the lion's body, the result is a predator of unparalleled power. The Sphinx is the divine avenger. It is the Sphinx, in its most martial form, the one that hunts the enemies of the light through the vast reaches of the heavens. In the late periods and the magical papyri, the Sphinx is often associated with the protection of the sunbark against the serpent Apophis. While the Great Sphinx of Giza watches the horizon, the Sphinx watches the sky. It is the one who sees the shadow before it falls. It is the embodiment of the pharaoh as a conqueror, the one who swoops down upon chaos with the speed of a bird of prey and the strength of a lion. There is a tension in this form: the earthbound power of the lion and the sky-reaching aspiration of the falcon. It is the guardian of the heights. We must also consider the classic Androsphinx, the human-headed form, which continued to exist alongside these animal variations. But even the Androsphinx evolved. In the New Kingdom, we see sphinxes with the faces of the great queens, such as Hatshepsut and Tiye. These were not just portraits, they were claims of divine authority. For a woman to be depicted as a sphinx was to claim the absolute power of the Shesep Ankh. It was to say that she, too, was a bridge between the worlds, a protector of the Mat, a being of lion-like strength and kingly wisdom. The face of the Sphinx became a canvas for the evolving ideology of power. Think of the variety of materials used for these different forms. While the Giza Sphinx is limestone, the sphinxes of the south are often carved from hard black granite, red quartzite, or shimmering basalt. These stones were chosen for their durability and their color symbolism. Black granite represented the fertile silt of the Nile and the mystery of the underworld. Red quartzite represented the lifeblood of the sun. To carve a sphinx from these stones was to imbue it with the eternal qualities of the material itself. A granite sphinx was not just a statue, it was a piece of the eternal mountain. The Avenue of the Sphinxes at Luxor is perhaps the most impressive ritual landscape ever constructed. When it was fully intact, it consisted of over 1,350 sphinxes. Imagine the psychological impact of such a sight. You are a pilgrim, arriving at the gates of the temple. You are small, mortal, and weary. But as you enter the dromos, you are surrounded by 1,000 stone gods. The repetition creates a sense of the infinite. It is as if the power of the Sphinx has been multiplied until it fills your entire field of vision. You are no longer in the mundane world of the village or the field. You have entered the place of truth, where the gods walk in stone. The theological transition between these heads is not a contradiction, but a progression. The Androsphinx is the intelligence of the sun. The Criosphinx is the creativity of the sun. The Sphinx is the ferocity of the sun. They are the three voices of the same divine roar. In the Book of the Dead, there are spells that allow the deceased to transform into various animals, to overcome the obstacles of the underworld. In a way, the Sphinx is the ultimate master of these transformations. It is the being that can change its mind, its face, and its focus while remaining rooted in the indestructible power of the lion. As we walk further down the avenue, the sun begins to set, and the stone sphinxes take on a different character. The shadows lengthen, filling the hollows of the ram's horns and the falcon's beak. In the twilight, the stone seems to soften. The hidden one, Amun, begins to emerge. The Sphinxes are no longer just guardians. They are the audience for the setting sun. They are the ones who wait for the night to begin, ready to guard the sanctuary through the 12 hours of darkness. They are the sentinels of the stars. There is a specific, meditative quality to the repetition of the Sphinxes. Unlike the Great Sphinx, which is a singular, overwhelming presence, the avenues of Sphinxes invite a rhythmic, walking meditation. Every few paces, another guardian. Every few paces, another reminder of the divine. It is a slow, steady pulse of power. It teaches us that the path to the divine is not a single leap, but a consistent journey, supported at every step by the strength of the ancestors and the gods. We must also think of the Sphinx gatekeepers of the smaller temples. In the temples of Hathor or Isis, the Sphinxes might take on more graceful, protective qualities. They might have the ears of a cow or the crown of the goddess. The Sphinx was a universal language. It was a vessel that could hold any divine essence. It was the ultimate guardian because it was the ultimate survivor. It could adapt to any temple, any god, and any era. As the moonlight touches the granite sphinxes of Karnak, they glow with a cold, silver light. You might feel the presence of the Netjeru, the gods, moving between the statues. The Egyptians did not believe that the gods were far away in some distant heaven. They believed the gods were here, in the stone, in the river, and in the wind. The Sphinx was the door through which the god could enter the physical world. 1,000 sphinxes meant 1,000 doors. It meant that the temple was a place where the barrier between the human and the divine was so thin that it practically disappeared. In this exploration of the forms and meanings of the Sphinx, we have seen that the monument is a living, breathing symbol. It is not static. It is a chameleon of the spirit. Whether it wears the face of a king, a ram, or a hawk, it remains the Shesep Ankh, the living image. It remains the anchor of the soul. We have walked the avenues of the south, felt the creative power of Amun and the celestial fire of Horus. We have understood that to the Egyptian, the Sphinx was a partner in the maintenance of the world. As we prepare to move into the darker, more mysterious realm of the Book of the Dead and the Sphinx's role in the underworld, hold on to this image of the diverse guardians. Remember that the Sphinx is the one who sees with many eyes and thinks with many minds. It is the one who guards the path of the sun in all its forms. The sand is shifting now, moving from the sunlit temple courts to the hidden subterranean passages of the Duat. The Sphinx is there, too, waiting in the darkness, ready to guide the soul through the final horizon. In the next part of our journey, we will descend into the hidden world of the dead. We will see how the Sphinx became a judge, a protector of the secret gates, and a terror to the wicked. We will look at the spells that invoke the lion's strength to protect the heart and the breath of the deceased. The journey is becoming more intense, the mysteries are deepening, and the silence of the stone is becoming more profound. But we have the guardians to guide us. We have the living image at our side. Let us follow the lion into the night, deeper into the heart of the Egyptian soul. The sun has finally dipped below the western edge of the world, leaving behind a sky of bruised purple and cooling gold. The heat of the day is a fading memory, replaced by a chill that seems to rise from the very earth itself. We have stood in the light of the horizon, but now we must follow the sun on its most dangerous journey. We must descend into the Duat, the hidden realm, the place where the stars go when they set and where the souls of the departed must wander to find eternity. In this subterranean landscape of rivers of fire and gates of shadow, the Sphinx undergoes its final and most profound transformation. Here, it is no longer just a stone watcher of the sand. It is the absolute guardian of the soul's passage, a being of divine justice and terrifying protection. Imagine the atmosphere of the Duat, as described in the Book of the Dead. It is not a place of silence, but a place of constant, rhythmic movement. It is a world of 12 regions, each corresponding to an hour of the night. Every hour has a gate, and every gate has a name that must be known, and a guardian that must be appeased. The air here is thick with the scent of old linen, of natron, and of the heavy, dark waters of the celestial Nile. It is in this twilight of the spirit that the Sphinx stands as the supreme gatekeeper. To the ancient Egyptian, the journey through the afterlife was a labyrinth of tests. The soul, or the Ba, had to prove its worthiness at every turn. And at the heart of this ordeal sat the lion, the witness to the truth. In the sacred papyri, the Sphinx is often linked to the concept of the Netteri Kerta, the divine underworld. While the Great Sphinx of Giza guarded the physical entrance to the necropolis, its spiritual counterpart guarded the metaphysical entrance to the kingdom of Osiris. The lion body of the Sphinx was seen as the physical manifestation of the Aker, the double lion god we encountered at the beginning of our journey. But in the Duat, Aker is not just a symbol. He is the earth itself. The body of the Sphinx is the tunnel through which the sun bark must sail. To pass through the Sphinx is to pass through the body of the earth, a process of burial and eventual resurrection. Think of the spells from the Book of the Dead, specifically those that invoke the power of the lion. Spell 17, one of the longest and most complex in the entire corpus, speaks of the great cat who took up his place at the foot of the Persea tree in Heliopolis to destroy the serpent Apophis. This great cat is a solar manifestation, a being of ferocity and light that protects the sun god Ra during the darkest hour of the night. The Sphinx is the monumental version of this divine protector. It is the one who claws at the darkness to ensure the light can return. In the Duat, the Sphinx eyes are not fixed on the eastern horizon. They are searching the shadows for the coils of the chaos serpent. As a soul approaches the halls of judgment, the presence of the Sphinx becomes even more palpable. In the Hall of the Two Truths, where the heart of the deceased is weighed against the feather of Maat, the Sphinx stands as a silent judge. It is the embodiment of the devourer of the wicked, while the creature Ammit, part lion, part hippopotamus, part crocodile, is the one who waits to consume the unworthy heart. The Sphinx represents the cosmic law that necessitates such a judgment. It is the stillness that observes the scales. To the ancient Egyptian, the Sphinx was a reminder that you could not hide from the truth of your own life. Its gaze could penetrate the layers of deception, seeing directly into the Ibi, the heart soul. Consider the role of the Sphinx as a protector of the Tekenu, the mysterious bundle often seen in funeral processions. The Sphinx was the guardian of the hidden things, the parts of the spirit that were too sacred or too dangerous to be spoken aloud. It was the warden of the secret names. In the New Kingdom, Duat texts, which detail the sun's journey through the 12 hours of night, the lion gods are the ones who pull the ropes of the solar bark. The Sphinx is the muscle behind the movement of the cosmos. Without the steady, rhythmic strength of the lion, the sun would be trapped in the night forever. The architecture of the tombs themselves reflected this belief. At the entrance of many royal and noble burial chambers, you would find small sphinxes or lion-headed statues. They were not just decorations. They were active magical devices. They were there to ward off the Mu, the restless spirits of the dead who might seek to harm the living or disturb the rest of the departed. The Sphinx was the spiritual shield, a being that created a sacred perimeter that no evil could cross. Its presence meant that the deceased was under the protection of the solar force, even in the depths of the earth. Imagine walking through the long, painted corridors of a tomb in the Valley of the Kings. The walls are covered in the spells of coming forth by day. You see depictions of the sun bark, of gods with the heads of jackals and ibises. And then you see the reclining lion. It is often placed at the threshold between the offering hall and the burial chamber. This is the final gate. To move beyond the lion is to enter the realm of the eternal. The lion is the last thing the living see before they depart, and the first thing the spirit encounters as it begins its journey. In the later dynasties, the Sphinx's role in the underworld took on a more personal, almost terrifying aspect. It was sometimes depicted with wings, suggesting a being that could hunt through all levels of the Duat, the earth, the water, and the air. This winged Sphinx was a creature of swift justice. It was the hunter of the unjust. It reflected the belief that the afterlife was not just a place of rest, but a place of active purging, where the soul had to be stripped of its earthly impurities. The Sphinx was the fire that burned away the dross. Think of the sensory details of this subterranean world. The smell of cedar oil and incense used in the mummification process was believed to be the fragrance of the gods. The ancients believed that the Sphinx breathed this divine scent, its nostrils flaring as it scented the intentions of the souls passing by. The stone of the monument in the world of the living was echoed by the iron of heaven in the world of the dead. The Sphinx of the Duat was a being of celestial metal, unbreakable and eternal. There is a profound connection between the Sphinx and the Ba, the human-headed bird that represented the personality of the deceased. The Ba was free to fly out of the tomb by day and return to the body by night. But to do so, it had to pass the guardian. The Sphinx was the beacon for the Ba. It was the landmark in the spiritual desert of the Duat, the fixed point that allowed the soul to find its way home. To know the face of the Sphinx was to know the way back to the light. We must also explore the Shabti figures, the small carved laborers placed in the tombs to work for the deceased in the afterlife. Sometimes, these figures were placed in boxes guarded by tiny sphinxes. The idea was that even the labor of the afterlife had to be protected and organized under the law of Mat. The Sphinx was the administrator of the spirit world, the one who ensured that every soul performed its task and received its reward according to the divine order. As the sun bark reaches the 6th hour of the night, the deepest point of the journey, it encounters the primordial mound of creation. Here, the sun god Ra is united with Osiris, the lord of the dead. It is a moment of total synthesis, where death and life become one. The Sphinx is the guardian of this sacred union. It is the flesh of Ra and the bone of Osiris. It represents the moment when the physical decay of the body meets the eternal light of the spirit. The Sphinx is the catalyst for this resurrection. It is the womb of the earth from which the new sun will be born. The silence of the Sphinx in the world above is a mirror to the silence of the night in the world below. But it is a fertile silence. It is the silence of the seed beneath the soil, waiting for the first drop of water. In the Duat, the Sphinx is the protector of the potential. It guards the germ of life that exists in every human soul, ensuring that it is not destroyed by the cold winds of the void. It is the ultimate maternal and paternal force, a being that encompasses all aspects of guardianship. Think of the spells of transformation in the Book of the Dead. There is a spell for taking the form of a lion. By reciting these words, the deceased could absorb the power of the Sphinx. They could become the guardian themselves. They could say, "I am the lion, I am the sun, I am the one who walks through the fire and is not burned." This was the goal of the Egyptian religion, not just to be protected by the gods, but to become like the gods. The Sphinx was the blueprint for this transformation. It was the perfect model of a being that had conquered its animal nature and ascended to divine intelligence. As we linger in the shadows of the Duat, we can feel the weight of the underworld pressing against us. It is a world of heavy symbols and deep, ancient magic. But the presence of the Sphinx provides a sense of security. It is the one thing that does not change, even in the shifting, illusionary landscapes of the afterlife. It is the anchor. Its paws are firmly planted on the bedrock of the Duat, just as they are on the limestone of Giza. It is the bridge that holds. The relationship between the Sphinx and the jackal-headed Anubis is also crucial. Anubis is the opener of the ways, the one who guides the soul to the judgment hall, but the Sphinx is the holder of the way. Anubis moves, the Sphinx stays. Anubis is the guide, the Sphinx is the gate. Together they form the complete system of Egyptian funerary protection. One provides the direction, the other provides the destination. As the 12th hour of the night approaches, and the sun bark begins its ascent toward the eastern horizon, the Sphinx's role as the guardian of the Duat reaches its climax. It is the one who gives the final push, the one who ensures that the sun breaks through the watery void of noon and into the sky of the living. The Sphinx is the midwife of the morning. Its roar is the first sound of the new day, a sound that echoes through the halls of the dead and the temples of the living, proclaiming that the darkness has been conquered once again. In this exploration of the Sphinx in the Duat, we have seen that its power extends far beyond the physical world. It is a cosmic entity that operates at the very center of the soul's journey. It is the protector, the judge, the bridge, and the catalyst for rebirth. We have followed the lion through the 12 hours of night, felt the heat of the fire and the cold of the shadows, and we have found that the Sphinx is the one constant in a world of change. As we prepare to ascend back into the light and explore the role of the female sphinxes and the queens of Egypt, carry this sense of mystery with you. Remember that the Sphinx has a dark side, a side that belongs to the night and the depths of the earth. But this darkness is not evil. It is the darkness of the fertile soil, the darkness that protects the seed until it is ready to bloom. The journey through the Duat is complete, and the sun is ready to rise on a new chapter of the Sphinx's story. Let us follow the light back to the surface, to the courts of the queens and the heart of the royal power. The light of Egypt is a deceptive artist. It can make a mountain look like a god, and it can make a stone statue appear as if it is drawing breath. As we return from the dark, heavy silence of the Duat, we find ourselves in the brilliant, sun-drenched courts of the new kingdom once more. But the atmosphere has shifted. We are no longer looking only at the fierce, masculine power of the pyramid builders. We are entering a space where the divine feminine rises, draped in the skin of a lion. In this movement of our journey, we must explore a radical transformation of the Shesep Ankh. We must look at the female sphinxes, beings that challenged the traditional boundaries of gender and power, proving that the heart of a lion can beat just as fiercely within the chest of a queen. To the ancient mind, the lioness was perhaps even more terrifying and revered than the lion. While the male lion was the symbol of solar majesty, the lioness was the symbol of solar execution. She was the eye of Ra, the fierce goddess Sekhmet, who could burn the enemies of the sun to ash with a single breath of fire. She was Tefnut, the lady of moisture and chaos. The lioness was the protector of the hearth and the hunter of the desert. So, when the great queens of Egypt chose to be depicted as sphinxes, they were not just adopting a royal symbol. They were invoking a primordial, feminine force that was both maternal and destructive. Close your eyes and imagine the great temple of Deir el-Bahari, the sublime of the sublimes. It is carved directly into the towering limestone cliffs of the West Bank at Thebes. The sun hits the white terraces with a brilliance that is almost blinding, and there, lining the processional way, are the sphinxes of Hatshepsut. They are carved from beautiful red granite, brought from the quarries of Aswan. These are not just any sphinxes. They are a profound statement of political and spiritual intent. Hatshepsut was a woman who ruled as a king. In a society where the throne was traditionally a male seat, she had to navigate a complex path to legitimacy. She did not just claim the crown, she claimed the very essence of kingship. Her sphinxes are a masterclass in this gender-bending ideology. Look at the face of one of these red granite guardians. The features are undeniably feminine. The arched eyebrows, the slightly almond-shaped eyes, the delicate curve of the lips. And yet, she wears the Nem's headdress, the royal uraeus, and the divine false beard. The body is that of a powerful, muscular lion, its paws stretched out in a pose of eternal vigilance. This was the female king, a being who encompassed the totality of human and divine nature. By becoming a sphinx, Hatshepsut was saying that her power was not limited by her gender. She was the living Horus, the protector of the horizon. The lioness king was a figure of absolute stability. To walk between her sphinxes was to feel the weight of a reign that was supported by the most ancient and fearsome of all goddesses. It was a visual prayer for Mat, a guarantee that a woman on the throne did not mean a world in chaos, but a world protected by the fierce intelligence of the lioness. The color of these sphinxes, the deep, earthy red, was chosen with precision. Red was the color of the sun's fire and the color of lifeblood. It was the color of the desert, the deshret, that Hatshepsut sought to control. These red sphinxes were the outposts of civilization, standing at the edge of the cultivated valley and the wild cliffs. They were the sentinels of her divine legacy. As the incense smoke rose from the altars before them, the stone seemed to glow, a physical manifestation of the queen's burning ambition and her deep religious devotion. But Hatshepsut was not the only queen to inhabit the form of the lion. We move forward a few generations to the reign of Amenhotep III, the Sun King of the 18th dynasty. His great royal wife, Queen Tiye, was a woman of unprecedented influence. She was not a king herself, but she was a partner in power, a figure who commanded respect from foreign emperors and local priests alike. At the Temple of Soleb, far to the south in Nubia, Ta was depicted as a sphinx. This was a different kind of power. Ta's sphinxes were not about claiming the throne, but about representing the divine feminine aspect of the sun god. She was the lady of the two lands, the wisdom that guided the king's hand. Her sphinxes were often paired with those of her husband, creating a cosmic balance. He was the sun. She was the solar radiance. He was the thunder. She was the lightning. To see Queen Ta as a sphinx was to understand that the monarchy was a dual entity, a harmony of male and female forces that kept the universe in balance. The iconography of the female sphinx often emphasized the uraeus, the cobra, even more prominently. The cobra was the protector of the forehead, the one who spit poison at the king's enemies. For a queen, the cobra was a link to the goddess Mut, the Great Mother. The female sphinx was the mother of the sun, the one who gave birth to the light every morning and protected it until the evening. There is a protective, almost nurturing quality to the way these statues were positioned. They were not just warriors, they were guardians of the royal line, the watchers of the future. Think of the psychological impact on the ancient Egyptian people. To see their queen as a sphinx was to see the goddess walk among them. It was a reminder that the divine was not distant, but present in the very faces of their rulers. The Sphinx was the ultimate bridge. It allowed the humanity of the queen to be fused with the eternity of the god. It was a transformation that transcended the physical body. In the form of the Sphinx, the queen was no longer just a woman. She was a cosmic principle. We must also consider the earlier examples, such as the mysterious Queen Hetepheres, the second of the fourth dynasty. Fragments of statues suggest that the idea of the female sphinx may be as old as the Giza monument itself. Perhaps there were always two, a lion and a lioness, reflecting the duality of the horizon. The Egyptian soul craved balance. For every yesterday, there was a tomorrow. For every west, there was an east. The female sphinx was the necessary counterpart to the male, the other half of the celestial equation. As we walk through the museum halls where these statues now rest, far from their original desert homes, the air feels different. There is a quiet, regal intensity in the gaze of a female sphinx. It is a gaze that is less aggressive than the male, perhaps, but more penetrating. It is the look of a mother who will destroy worlds to protect her children. It is the look of a queen who knows that her power comes not from the sword, but from the spirit. The female sphinxes also played a role in the myth of the distant goddess. In this ancient story, the daughter of Ra, often Sekhmet or Tefnut, becomes angry with humanity and retreats into the deserts of Nubia in the form of a wild lioness. The world begins to wither without her. The god Thoth is sent to find her and convince her to return with music, dance, and wine. When she returns, she is transformed from a destructive lioness into the beautiful, nurturing goddess Hathor. The female sphinxes of the New Kingdom are a permanent reminder of this myth. They represent the moment of balance, the point where the ferocity of the lioness meets the grace of the goddess. They are the tamed fire. Imagine the festivals dedicated to these queenly sphinxes. There would have been music, the rhythmic clatter of the sistrum, the deep thrum of the harp. there would have been the smell of fresh lotus flowers and the taste of sweet pomegranate wine. The sphinxes were the centerpieces of these celebrations, their stone bodies draped in garlands of flowers, their eyes anointed with precious oils. They were not cold monuments. They were living participants in the joy of the kingdom. The transition to the Ptolemaic period brought even more elaborate forms. Queens like Arsinoe II were depicted as sphinxes with Greek hairstyles and Egyptian crowns, a fusion of two worlds. The Sphinx proved to be a universal vessel for power, adaptable to the aesthetics of any age. But the core remained the same: the lioness, the queen, and the sun. It was a trinity of authority that resonated through 3,000 years of history. As we linger in the presence of Hatshepsut's red granite lioness, we can feel the echoes of her struggle and her triumph. She was a woman who dared to occupy the form of a god, and in doing so, she changed the face of the Sphinx forever. She proved that the horizon has many voices and many faces. The silence of the stone is not a lack of speech. It is a speech that has been compressed into a single, eternal image. The Sphinx of the Queen is the guardian of the heart. It reminds us that true strength is found in the union of opposites, the wild and the civilized, the fierce and the gentle, the male and the female. It is the Mat of the soul. As the sun begins to set on this part of our journey, the red granite of the statues seems to deepen into a color like wine. The eyes of the queen lioness catch the last rays of the sun, and for a moment, you might swear you see them blink. In the final part of our journey, we will return to the Great Sphinx of Giza one last time. We will look at its silence in the face of the modern world, the riddles it has inspired, and the way it continues to watch over the Nile long after the last priest has died and the last hieroglyph was carved. We will see the Sphinx as the ultimate symbol of the endurance of the human spirit. The desert is calling us back to the dunes. The journey is coming to its conclusion, but the mystery is only beginning to reveal its true depth. Let us walk back to the plateau, to the Father of Terror, and find the meaning in the eons of silence. The shadows of the pyramids have grown long, reaching across the Giza plateau like the fingers of a giant trying to touch the edge of the world. The sun is a dying ember on the western horizon, and the air is cooling, carrying the scent of evening jasmine from the valley below and the dry, ancient dust of the high desert. We have traveled through the cosmic dawn of the lion god, witnessed the sweat and stone dust of the old kingdom builders, heard the whispers of a prince's dream, and walked the grand avenues of the many-faced sphinxes of the south. Now, we return to the Great Sphinx of Giza one final time. We stand before the Father of Terror in the twilight of its long existence, watching as the world of the pharaohs fades into the world of the Greeks, the Romans, and the modern seekers of truth. This is the final chapter of our journey, a meditation on the silence that survived the fall of empires and the mystery that continues to outlast the memory of its makers. To understand the later life of the Sphinx, we must understand the shift in the human mind. For thousands of years, the Sphinx had been the Shesep Ankh, the living image of divine order. It did not need to speak, because its existence was the answer to the chaos of the desert. But when the Greeks arrived in the Nile Valley, they brought with them a different way of seeing. The Greeks were a people of questions, of logic, and of drama. They saw the Great Sphinx, and were both fascinated and unsettled by its stillness. It was during this era that the Egyptian guardian began to be layered with foreign myths. The Greek Sphinx was a creature of riddles, a female monster with wings and the tail of a serpent, who strangled those who could not solve her puzzles. But the Great Sphinx of Giza remained unmoved by these new stories. It did not ask riddles, it was the riddle itself. The Greeks called it the Sphinx, a word that may have been a corruption of the Egyptian Shesep Ankh. They gave it a name that meant to strangle or to bind, perhaps sensing the immense, crushing power latent in the stone body. Yet, as they settled in Alexandria and the Delta, they began to blend their own aesthetics with the ancient forms. We see sphinxes from this era that are more lithe, more decorative, sometimes even with the curly hair and delicate features of the Hellenistic style. But even as the form changed in the hands of foreign sculptors, the spiritual gravity of the Giza Sphinx remained the anchor. It was the ancient, immovable grandfather of all the smaller, winged creatures that now adorned the palaces of the Ptolemies. When the legions of Rome finally marched into Egypt, turning the land of the pharaohs into the breadbasket of an empire, the Sphinx faced a new kind of visitor. To the Romans, Egypt was a land of exotic antiquity, a place where time itself seemed to be preserved in the dry air. The Roman emperors, from Augustus to Hadrian, felt the pull of the Giza plateau. They saw the Sphinx not as a living god, but as the ultimate souvenir of a lost world. They were the first modern tourists. They carved their names into its paws, leaving graffiti in Latin that spoke of their awe and their presence. They cleared the sand once more, building small altars and stairways so that their dignitaries could stand between the paws and look up into the weathered face of the sun god. For the Romans, the Sphinx was a symbol of eternitas, eternity. It was a witness to the rise and fall of kings, a being that had seen the glory of the Caesars long before they were even born. They shipped smaller sphinxes back to Rome, placing them in the sanctuaries of Isis and the gardens of their villas. The Sphinx became the face of Egypt for the Western world, a silent representative of a culture that was becoming more and more mysterious as the ability to read the hieroglyphs began to vanish. The silence of the Sphinx became deeper, no longer a silence of presence, but a silence of loss. The keys to its story were being buried by the passage of time and the shift in faith. As the centuries turned and the new religion of the cross, and later the crescent, spread across the land, the Great Sphinx entered its longest sleep. The temples of Giza were closed. The priests who knew the secret names of the sun god were gone. The Nile shifted further away, and the Sahara, ever patient, began to pull its golden shroud over the monument once more. For hundreds of years, the Sphinx was buried up to its neck. Travelers from the Middle Ages describe seeing only a giant head emerging from the sand, a stone fruit of the desert. The Arabs of this time called it Abul Hol, the father of terror. They believed it was a powerful talisman, a guardian that kept the sand from overwhelming the fertile fields of the Nile. There is a haunting story from the 14th century, told by the historian al-Makrizi. He speaks of a man named Sa'im al-Dar, a Sufi fanatic who was disturbed by the sight of the local peasants making offerings to the Sphinx in the hope of a good harvest. In his zeal to destroy what he saw as an idol, he climbed the monument and hammered away at its face, damaging the nose. The legend says that shortly after this act, the sand began to encroach upon the fields with unprecedented fury, as if the guardian had withdrawn its protection in anger. Whether the story is true or a reflection of the deep respect the local people still felt for the father of terror, It illustrates the enduring power of the Sphinx to stir the human heart, even in an age when its original names were forgotten. We must speak of the nose of the Sphinx, for it has become a central part of its modern mythology. Pop culture often tells us that Napoleon's cannons shot it off during his Egyptian campaign, but we know from sketches made decades before Napoleon was born that the nose was already missing. The damage was not the result of a single moment of war, but of centuries of weathering, the slow erosion of wind-blown sand, and the occasional hand of human interference. The loss of the nose has ironically given the Sphinx a more universal face. It is no longer just the portrait of a single king. It has become a blank canvas upon which every culture can project its own image of humanity. The rediscovery of the Sphinx in the modern era began with a frantic energy. In the early 19th century, explorers like Giovanni Caviglia began the monumental task of digging out the paws once more. They worked in the suffocating heat, moving mountains of sand by hand, driven by a desire to find the Hall of Records or the hidden chambers they were certain lay beneath the stone. What they found instead were the ancient repairs of the Romans and the dream stela of Thutmose. They found that the Sphinx was even larger than they had imagined, its body stretching out in a long, graceful curve that had been hidden for 1,000 years. The archaeology of the 20th century brought a more scientific gaze to the monument. We began to understand the geology of the limestone, the different phases of repair, and the complex relationship between the Sphinx and the surrounding temples. We used lasers and ground-penetrating radar to look through the stone, seeking the secrets of its construction. But even with all our technology, the Sphinx remains elusive. Every answer we find seems to lead to a new question. How exactly was the head carved without a single error? Why is there no mention of its construction in the contemporary records of the Fourth Dynasty? The Sphinx keeps its secrets well, tucked away in the fissures of its ancient rock. Think of the Sphinx as it stands today in the center of a bustling modern world. To its east lies the sprawling city of Cairo, with its noise, its lights, and its millions of souls. To its west lies the infinite silence of the Sahara. The Sphinx sits on the edge of these two worlds, a bridge between the hyperactive present and the eternal past. At night, when the sound and light shows illuminate the plateau in shades of blue, red, and gold, the Sphinx is forced to play a role in a modern drama. But when the lights go out and the tourists go home, the monument returns to its true nature. It returns to the silence. This silence is the greatest gift of the Sphinx. In a world that is obsessed with noise, with explanation, and with the constant chatter of the ego, the Sphinx stands as a monument to the unsaid. It reminds us that there are things that cannot be captured in words, things that can only be understood through presence. The gaze of the Sphinx is not looking at us. It is looking through us, staring at a point on the horizon that represents the end of time and the beginning of eternity. It is a meditation in stone, a silent roar that echoes through the halls of history. As we conclude our 2-hour journey through the sands of time, feel the coolness of the evening air on your skin. The desert is a place of extremes, the burning heat of the sun and the freezing clarity of the stars. The Sphinx has endured them both for 5,000 years. It is the ultimate survivor. It has survived the shifting of the Nile, the burial of the sand, the chisels of the Vandals, and the curiosity of the world. It remains the Horemakhet, the Horus in the horizon, the one who watches for the light. We have walked through the cosmic origins, seeing the twin lions of yesterday and tomorrow. We have stood with the builders as they hewed a god from the bedrock. We have slept with the prince and shared his dream. We have walked the avenues of 1,000 guardians and descended into the shadows of the underworld. We have seen the lioness queens claim their power, and now we see the Sphinx as it is, a weathered, battered, beautiful mountain of limestone that refuses to die. The story of the Sphinx is the story of humanity's quest for permanence. We build because we are afraid of being forgotten. We carve because we want to leave a mark on the earth that the wind cannot erase. The Sphinx is the highest expression of this desire. It is the physical proof that we were once here, that we once looked at the sun and saw a god, and that we once believed we could bridge the gap between the mortal and the divine. As the last light of the sun disappears behind the second pyramid, the Sphinx is swallowed by the blue shadows of the night, but we know it is there. It does not need the light to see. The journey into the horizon is a circle. We end where we began, in the silence of the sand. But we are different now. We carry with us the weight of the stone and the heat of the sun. We carry the memory of the lion and the king. The Sphinx has taught us that to be a guardian, one must be patient. To be a god, one must be still. And to be human, one must never stop looking for the light on the horizon. As you drift toward sleep, or as you move back into the world of the living, let the image of the Sphinx be your anchor. May your own horizons be clear, and may you find the strength of the lion and the wisdom of the king in the quiet corners of your own heart. The desert is wide, the stars are many, and the Great Sphinx of Giza continues its long, silent watch. It has been here long before us, and it will be here long after we are gone, waiting for the next dawn, the next dreamer, and the next soul to find its way back to the horizon. The wind is soft now, a gentle whisper through the temple ruins. The Nile flows on, silver under the light of the moon. The pyramids are dark silhouettes against the velvet sky. And the Sphinx is there, its paws resting on the edge of eternity, its eyes fixed on the east. The dream is over, but the stone remains. Thank you for journeying through the 9 worlds of the Egyptian soul. If you found peace in the presence of the guardian, and if the stories of the sand have touched your heart, please leave a like and subscribe to Hearths of Myths. May your walls be strong, may your hearth be warm, and may the silence of the Sphinx guide you safely through the night. Sleep well, seeker of light. The horizon is waiting.